I was 16 when this happened. At the time, I was living with my sister and her husband in an old two-story house on the edge of a small town in Missouri. The house was built in the early 1900s and had that creaky, drafty feeling that older homes always seem to have. The kind of place where the floorboards moan under your feet and the windows never shut quite right. But rent was cheap, and my sister had been kind enough to let me stay with them while I finished up high school. My room was in the basement, which had been fixed up just enough to be livable. Bare drywall, concrete floor with a few rugs thrown over it, a bed, a desk, and a couple of lamps. Their room was also down in the basement, down a short hallway from mine. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. I remember that day started like any other. I came home from school around 3:30 in the afternoon. My backpack was heavy, filled with textbooks and notebooks, and I was already stressed thinking about the math homework I hadn't finished. I opened the side door, tossed my shoes off, and went straight down the stairs to the basement. The air was cool and musty, as usual. There was always this faint smell of damp wood and something earthy, probably just the way basements always smell, but it never really went away no matter how much Febreze we used. When I got to my room, I threw my bag onto the bed and started taking off my hoodie. That's when I heard it. Clear as day. A voice. "Help me, please." It wasn't loud, more like someone speaking in a normal tone of voice. But it was unmistakably my sister's voice. She wasn't yelling or crying. It was just a soft, calm, almost polite plea. My heart jumped a little, not from fear, but from urgency. Something in my gut made me react immediately. I dropped everything and rushed out of my room, turning left toward the hallway that led to their bedroom. I pushed the door open without knocking. It was dark inside. Their curtains were drawn, and the light was off. The bed was made. There were no signs of anyone being in there. No one was in the room. I looked around quickly, confused. I checked behind the door under the bed, even peeked into their small walk-in closet. Nothing. The room was empty. That's when it hit me like a punch in the chest. I hadn't seen my sister's car in the driveway when I got home. I remembered now. She had texted me earlier in the day saying she had a dentist appointment and wouldn't be back until the evening. My brother-in-law worked nights, and he wouldn't be home until after midnight. I was completely alone in the house. I stood there frozen for a few seconds, trying to process what had just happened. I retraced the events in my head. I had definitely heard her voice. It wasn't muffled like it was from upstairs. It wasn't distant like it was from outside. It was close. It came from somewhere in the basement, from down the hallway, maybe even from their room. It didn't make any sense. I went back into the hallway, now walking slower, more cautious. I checked the laundry room, the little storage closet, even behind the stairs. No one. Nothing. I started to feel uneasy. Not panicked, not yet, but something was definitely off. I wasn't the type to jump at shadows or freak out over creaky noises. I like to think I was pretty level-headed. But this wasn't a creak or a shadow. It was a voice. A specific voice. My sister's. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. My heart was still racing. I tried to distract myself by pulling out my homework, but I couldn't focus. I kept thinking back to how real the voice sounded. Not like a dream or my imagination. It was like she was right there. I didn't tell anyone about it that night. When my sister got home, I heard her come down the stairs, heard her talking on the phone in the kitchen upstairs, and finally heard the familiar shuffle of her feet going down the hall to her room. I sat there in silence. For some reason, I didn't feel like bringing it up. Maybe I didn't want to sound crazy. Maybe I just wanted to pretend it hadn't happened. But things didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing small things. At first, I brushed them off. I'd find my bedroom light on after I knew I'd turned it off. A pair of shoes I always left by the door would be on the other side of the room. I'd wake up and find my closet door open, even though I kept it shut at all times. I started making mental notes, double-checking things. I even left sticky notes for myself to make sure I wasn't just forgetting. But every now and then, something would still be different. There were no footsteps, no slamming doors, no moaning or dramatic haunted house crap. It was all subtle. So subtle that I felt like I might be losing it. But I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. The worst part came about a month later. It was late, maybe around 1 a.m. I had stayed up too late playing games on my laptop and finally decided to call it a night. I turned everything off and climbed into bed. As I was laying there, just starting to drift off, I heard a noise. A soft creak, like someone stepping on one of the loose boards just outside my room. I opened my eyes, fully alert now. I didn't move or say anything. I just listened. There was another creak, then nothing. I slowly sat up in bed, trying not to make any noise. I reached over and turned on the lamp next to my bed. The light made everything feel a little less scary, but my nerves were shot. I waited, ears straining. After a few minutes, I finally worked up the nerve to step out of bed and check the hallway. It was empty. I stood there in the doorway for a good while, just staring down that dark hallway. I had this heavy feeling in my chest, like something was watching me. It didn't feel like paranoia. It felt real. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I finally told my sister everything. Not just about the voice, but all of it. The lights, the shoes, the open closet, the creaks. She didn't laugh. She didn't act surprised. In fact, she looked almost relieved. She told me that ever since they'd moved in, weird things had happened. She'd hear people walking upstairs when no one was home. Her husband once found the kitchen chairs stacked on top of each other when he came down for water. She said she never wanted to scare me, so they just didn't say anything. We never figured out what was going on. We talked about getting cameras or even just moving out. Eventually, I finished high school and moved in with a friend across town. My sister and her husband stuck around for another year before they finally sold the place and moved into a newer house closer to the city. To this day, I don't have an answer for what I heard that afternoon in the basement. I don't know how to explain the voice that sounded exactly like my sister's, asking for help when she wasn't even home, or all the little things that kept happening afterward. Maybe there were logical explanations. Maybe it was the acoustics in the old house, or maybe stress and isolation can mess with your mind in ways you don't notice at first. All I know is that I was never more relieved than when I left that house for good. The silence in that basement wasn't normal. It felt too heavy, too thick, like it was waiting. I've never heard that voice again, and I never want to. It wasn't my story, but my cousin told me about it years ago, and I can still remember the look on his face when he did. It wasn't just some dramatic storytelling or trying to scare me. It felt real. Too real. He swore it happened when he was about 15, maybe 16, back in the late 80s or early 90s, in our little southern town that always felt like it was stuck in time. Back then, a lot of Hispanic migrant worker families came through our area. They didn't stay long, usually just a few months at a time, depending on the season. They'd work the fields, send their kids to school for a bit, and then vanish overnight once the work dried up or when immigration got too close. Some of them lived in old, rural houses that weren't in use. It wasn't unusual to see a place suddenly full of life, lights on, kids running around, music playing, and then completely abandoned the next day. No warning, no goodbyes. Just gone. My cousin had a group of close friends he hung out with back then. They did what most boys their age did: rode bikes around town, camped in the woods behind someone's property, and got into places they shouldn't have. This one night, close to Christmas, they were all sleeping over at one of the boys' houses on the edge of town. It was snowing, a rare thing for us. The kind of snow that muffled all the usual nighttime sounds and made the world feel unfamiliar. Everything looked brighter, even in the dark, and the usual landmarks were softened and blurred by the snow. The dad of the kid hosting the sleepover had served in the military and had this old pair of night vision goggles. My cousins said they were obsessed with those things. They'd pass them around, taking turns looking out the window, watching how the snowflakes glowed like sparks through the green lens. It was quiet, peaceful. Then one of them spotted something strange. Just down the road, maybe 4 or 5 houses away, there was a place that had recently been left empty. A Hispanic family had been living there for a few months, and one of the kids had gone to school with my cousin. Then, without any notice, the family was gone. My cousin remembered his classmate not showing up one day, and the next morning the house looked empty. Curtains drawn, mailbox stuffed, Yard already starting to look abandoned. But that night, through the goggles, they saw a light in the attic window. Not a bright light like a bulb or a flashlight, more like a flickering orange glow, like from a candle or a fire. They passed the goggles around, each confirming what they saw. It was definitely coming from the attic. There was no car in the driveway, no tracks in the snow. The rest of the house was pitch black. They didn't go right away. For a while, they just watched. Teenage boys, full of adrenaline and curiosity, daring each other without saying it. Eventually, they bundled up layers of sweatshirts, jackets, mismatched gloves and scarves, and made their way outside. My cousin remembered how quiet it was, how their boots crunched in the snow like gunshots. It was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, that makes your breath feel like smoke in the air. They took their time getting to the house. The streets were empty, no one out at that hour, especially not in that weather. When they reached the yard, they stayed close to the tree line at first, just watching the house. The attic window was high up, but the glow was still there, still flickering. None of them said a word. They didn't have to. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Who would be in that house, in the attic, at night, during a snowstorm, with no lights on except a candle? Eventually, they decided not to go in. It wasn't fear exactly, at least not the panicked kind. More like a gut feeling. Something about it just felt off. They agreed to come back in the morning when it was light and easier to explain if anyone asked what they were doing. The next morning, as soon as the sun came up, they bundled up again and made their way back. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, and the whole neighborhood looked clean, white, untouched. No new tracks, no car, no sign that anyone had been in or out. When they got to the house, they checked the front door. Locked. Same with the back. One of the boys found a window on the side that had a broken latch. It didn't take much to lift it open and climb inside. The house was cold and completely empty. No furniture, no clothes, not even trash. Just bare walls and the echo of their boots on the wood floors. They moved through the house slowly, room by room, half expecting to find someone still inside. But it was dead silent. They finally found the attic trapdoor in a hallway ceiling. It had one of those pull cords dangling down. When one of the boys pulled it, the ladder creaked down slowly. My cousin said that was the part that gave him chills, not the noise, but the sudden rush of freezing air that came down with it. Like the attic had been sealed for weeks, holding in the cold. They climbed up one by one. My cousin said he was the third to go. The attic was dark, no windows except for that one at the far end. The only light came from the gray sky filtering through the frost-covered glass. But even with the weak light, they could all see it clearly. Right in the center of the attic was a wooden crucifix. Not a small one. Not something you'd hang on a wall. It was made from rough wood, nailed together, standing upright like it had been jammed into the floor. And nailed to it, through the hooves, was a lamb. A real lamb, maybe a young one. Its body was bloodied, dried, and dark around the wounds. Its throat had been cut, and the blood had soaked into the wood and frozen into the floorboards below. There was dried wax on the ground in a circle around it. Dozens of candle stubs had been burned down to almost nothing, all arranged neatly around the crucifix. No signs of fire damage. No smoke. Just the candles and the carcass. They stood there for a long time. No one moved. No one spoke. My cousin said it didn't feel like a prank. It didn't feel like some kids messing around. It felt deliberate, focused, ritualistic, like someone had done it with a purpose. Eventually, they climbed down. No one wanted to touch anything. They just left the ladder as it was and walked out through the window they came in. My cousin never told an adult. None of them did, far as he knows. He said it didn't feel like something they could explain without sounding insane. And more than that, they didn't want to draw attention to themselves. They shouldn't have been in the house. And deep down, maybe they didn't want to know who or what had done it. Years later, he told me he still thinks about it. He wonders if it was tied to some kind of religious ritual, maybe a fringe sect or a group that used old practices. Maybe something passed down culturally and warped over time. He didn't think it was satanic or anything. More like obsessive. Sacred even. But to him, the most terrifying part wasn't the lamb or the crucifix or even the blood. It was the thought of what might have happened if they had gone in that night, when the candle was still burning, when whoever had done it was possibly still inside, up there in that attic, performing whatever that was. They were just a few teenage boys, curious and dumb, standing out in the cold, completely unaware of how close they came to walking in on something they were never meant to see. It was deep into the night, around 11 or maybe a little past, and we were all out there freezing, wrapped in our thickest hoodies, jackets, and even blankets. I was camping with my cousin somewhere in the mountains, far enough from town that you couldn't even see the glow of any streetlights in the distance. The air was completely still, heavy with cold, and smelled like pine and smoke. Our campsite was a few hundred feet from a narrow dirt road, with tall trees all around us, like a wall of trunks and leaves that blocked everything out. It felt like we were in a pocket of silence and darkness, except for the fire right in the center of our circle. Most of the adults and younger kids had gone into their tents already. They were tired from hiking earlier in the day. That left just 5 of us outside. Me, 2 of my older cousins, and a couple of the younger ones who were determined to stay up as late as possible. It had been a fun evening, joking, talking about random things, passing around marshmallows, hot drinks, and snacks. But now the night had settled in hard. The cold had gone from uncomfortable to painful. We scooted our folding chairs and closer to the fire until our boots were just a few inches from the glowing logs. I could feel the heat pulsing against my jeans, and my hands kept flipping back and forth between the fire and the inside of my sleeves, trying to warm up my fingers. At some point, someone brought up a story, just a random, creepy one that didn't sound like a big deal at first. I honestly don't remember all the details, but it was something about a group of campers who sat too close to the fire on a night just like that one. They were so cold, apparently, that they kept leaning in closer and closer without realizing how close they were getting. One of them fell in, then another, and then another. The stories said they all burned to death, like some weird domino effect, just toppling into the flames one by one. It sounded ridiculous, like something a kid would come up with to freak people out. But the second the story ended, a heavy silence settled over us. It wasn't like the pauses we had earlier in the night when someone went to grab something from the cooler or take a bathroom break. This was still and long. None of us said anything. We just sat there staring at the fire. I could hear the sharp crackle and pop of the wood, the shifting of coals, and the occasional gust of wind high above us moving through the trees. That was it. No one moved. No one laughed. I remember my throat felt tight and dry, and I had the weirdest urge to look behind me, even though I knew there was nothing there. It wasn't the story that got to me. It was the silence. The way it just landed on us, like a thick blanket. It felt wrong, like we were being watched. And even though we had been talking all night and laughing, for some reason in that moment, none of us could say a word. The fire hissed and crackled, spitting embers that floated up into the night like tiny stars. I could hear one of my cousins shifting in his chair, the metal legs scraping slightly against the dirt. Then slowly, almost like we all had the same thought at once, we each scooted our chairs back. Just an inch or 2, but it was enough. We didn't say anything about it. We just all did it. I looked down at my boots and realized how close they'd been to the fire. The tips were dry and warm, but the rubber sole on the right one had started to soften a little. I hadn't even noticed. We sat like that for a while, farther from the flames now, just letting the heat reach us in waves instead of clinging to it. I remember my eyes stinging from the smoke, but I didn't want to blink. I just kept staring at the fire, like it was going to tell me something. After a while, the cold started to creep in harder. My fingers were stiff and hurting, even inside my sleeves. One of the cousins got up and said he was calling it a night. The rest of us agreed, almost too quickly, like we had all just been waiting for someone to say it. We didn't even put the fire out all the way, just threw some dirt on it and left it smoldering, enough so it wouldn't catch anything but still warm enough to glow faintly. I zipped myself into the tent and lay there for a long time with my eyes open. The tent fabric flapped a little every time the wind picked up. I could hear twigs snapping here and there, far off but still close enough to make me flinch. I knew it was probably animals, raccoons, or maybe deer. But my brain wouldn't stop thinking about that story. Not the fire, not the people falling in. Just that moment after it ended, when we all froze like something had turned us off. It wasn't until the next morning that I noticed something weird. I had gone back out to the fire pit while the others were making breakfast and cleaning up. The logs from the night before were burned through, mostly black and gray now. I noticed something melted right near the edge of the pit. I got closer and saw that one of the chairs, one of those cheap folding ones, was slightly warped. The plastic on the leg had melted down and hardened again in a weird shape. It looked like it had gotten way too close to the heat. No one had said anything about it. I asked a few of my cousins casually if they remembered who sat there. None of them were sure. Everyone had been shuffling around so much through the night. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that someone had to have been right up on the edge. That chair hadn't just been near the fire, it had almost been in it. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had been too. If someone had leaned forward just a little too far, or if the leg of a chair had given out, they could have gone straight into the flames. No warning. Just one moment you're warming your hands, the next you're burning alive. Nothing bad happened that night. No one got hurt. No one screamed or panicked. But I still think about that silence. That moment where all of us sat still. Too still, like we knew something wasn't right. Maybe it was just the story. Maybe it was the cold. Or maybe some part of us, some quiet, ancient instinct buried deep down, sensed how thin the line was between comfort and danger, between warmth and death. I haven't gone camping since that trip. Not because I'm scared of the woods or the dark or anything like that. It's just that now, whenever I think about sitting around a fire at night, all I can hear is that silence. That sudden, hollow stillness. And the sound of firewood cracking in the cold. When I got the call about switching to night shifts, I wasn't surprised. A lot of guys had been quitting the overnight patrols lately. The talk around the ranger station was that people just couldn't take it. No one would say what it was exactly, but I figured it was just the usual boredom, maybe some wildlife encounters, or just a general unease about being alone in the woods after dark. I wasn't thrilled about it, but it was part of the job. I'd been a park ranger for over 6 years. I thought I could handle anything. That night, I arrived at the watchtower a little before 5. The sun was still up, hanging low in the sky, and the heat was finally starting to ease off. The tower stood next to what I'd call a small lake, though some maps labeled it a pond. Either way, the water stretched wide and quiet, smooth like glass except when the occasional fish broke the surface. The tower itself was built on thick steel legs that rose about 30 feet above the ground. I climbed the narrow staircase slowly, my boots clanging on each step. At the top was the main room, a small rectangular space with one wall made of glass, looking out toward the ridge and forest beyond. The other 3 walls were wooden. Inside, it was just as I remembered from my training days. A bed on the right with a nightstand, a small kitchenette on the left with a pair of cabinets, one small, one large, and a radio station straight ahead under the window. The walkway circled around the whole room, giving a 360-degree view if you walked the perimeter. I took a look around. Everything seemed in order. On the nightstand was a heavy-duty flashlight. Inside it were the usual supplies, binoculars, a long-range walkie-talkie, and a backup battery. I checked the cabinets. The small one opened without trouble and had canned food, water bottles, a first aid kit, and a couple of granola bars that looked older than me. The big cabinet didn't open. Locked tight. No key in sight. I figured it probably held either sensitive equipment or supplies only higher-ups had access to. I didn't think much of it at the time. Once I'd settled in, I walked over to the radio and pressed the button to check in with my partner, Donnie, who was working down at the main ranger station. "Well, Donnie," I said into the mic, "looks like it's just us tonight." No answer. I figured he was in the bathroom or maybe stepped out for smoke, so I left it at that. I grabbed the binoculars and the walkie, stepped out onto the walkway, and started doing a slow scan of the surrounding area. The view was amazing at that hour. The forest looked like a sea of shadows and leaves, stretching for miles. I moved the binoculars slowly, sweeping the dirt roads, the tree lines, and especially the ridge about half a mile off. That's when I saw something that made me stop. At first glance, it looked like a snowman. Just a white, roundish figure standing near the edge of the ridge, completely still. I blinked. A snowman in July made no sense. I adjusted the focus and looked again. It wasn't a snowman. It was a kid, a small person, standing still and wearing what looked like a white sheet draped over them, with 2 dark eye holes cut out. A ghost costume, like something out of a Halloween cartoon, like Charlie Brown. I frowned and keyed the walkie. "Hey Donnie, you there?" His voice crackled back a few seconds later. "Yeah, just made it out," he said. I chuckled. That was typical Donnie humor. I told him about the kid. "You think you could check the ridge? There's someone up there in a ghost costume. A white sheet with eye holes, just standing there staring up at the tower." There was a pause, then Donnie came back. "You mean like from Charlie Brown Halloween?" "Exactly," I said. He agreed to head out there and check it out. I went back to scanning the area, but the kid didn't move. Just stood there, still as a statue. It gave me a weird feeling in my gut. Not fear exactly, just unease. Like something was off. 40 minutes passed. The sun dropped below the trees and dusk turned to full-on darkness. I scanned the ridge again, and the kid was gone. No sign of him. I keyed the walkie again. "Donnie, you there?" His voice came back, a little out of breath. "Yeah, I'm almost at the ridge. What's up?" I told him the kid had moved. He said he'd search the area. A few minutes later, I spotted his flashlight beam sweeping across the trees near the ridge. I looked through the binoculars and saw Donnie turning in circles, shining the light around, clearly trying to spot someone. He shrugged, probably not seeing anything. Then he keyed the walkie. "I don't see anyone, H." His flashlight flickered and went out. The walkie crackled into static. "Donnie," I said. "Donnie, come in. Are you there? What happened?" "Donnie." Nothing. Then, a loud shriek tore through the night. It came from right beneath the tower. I froze. I stepped back and pointed the flashlight down through the railing. What I saw made my stomach drop. A woman, pale blue, with joints twisted at strange angles, limbs bent the wrong way, stood between the base of the tower and the pond. Her hair hung in wet strings, and her eyes, or rather the holes where her eyes should have been, stared directly up at me. She didn't walk. She sprinted. In seconds, she was at the first step of the tower stairs. Her limbs flailed in unnatural ways as she ran, but she moved with impossible speed. I've seen Olympic runners. She was faster. I backed up, heart racing, nearly tripping over the threshold as I burst back inside the tower. I slammed the door shut, locked it, grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find, and crouched next to the wall. My breathing was ragged. I stared at the door, waiting to hear footsteps on the stairs. Nothing. No sounds. No banging. No creaking wood. Just silence. Then behind me, I heard a dull click. My blood ran cold. I turned slowly toward the cabinets. One of the large ones, the one that had been locked, was now wide open. Inside it, crouched in the darkness, was the ghost. The damn sheet. The eye holes. Just staring out at me from the cabinet like some kind of horror movie jump scare. I froze, too terrified to move, until the thing tilted its head and giggled. That giggle snapped me out of it. I knew that giggle. I grabbed the sheet and yanked it off. It was one of Donnie's kids, smiling up at me, holding a walkie-talkie in his little hands. He clicked the button. "Hey Dad, we got him." Donnie's voice crackled through. "Ha ha ha. Good job." I grabbed the walkie. My hand was shaking, but I keyed it. "Ha ha. Very funny, you jerk." Donnie replied, "Yeah, listening to you scream like a girl was the best bit." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, screw you too, Donnie. By the way, that wasn't me who screamed." "What?" he said. "That was the woman, at the base of the tower. Pale. Empty eye sockets. Broken limbs. She shrieked and ran up the stairs like lightning." Who was that? Your wife. Silence on the line. Then, stammering. And my wife. You said the ghost looked like Charlie Brown. That's not. Wait, what woman? I didn't answer. I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked down. Nothing. No sign of her. Not in the trees. Not by the stairs. Not by the pond. Just still, quiet darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the bed with a knife in my lap, eyes locked on the door. Every creak in the wood made me flinch. Every gust of wind felt like footsteps. The kid fell asleep on the floor at some point, but I didn't move. Couldn't. When my shift ended at dawn, I climbed down the stairs without looking back. I drove straight to the ranger station and handed in my resignation. No explanation. No stories. Just a short note and my badge. I've never gone back. Not to the tower. Not to the woods. Not even near the lake. I don't care what Donnie thinks. I don't care if he still laughs about it to this day. That thing I saw / it wasn't a prank. It wasn't someone's wife. It wasn't supposed to be there. I don't know if this will be seen, but I hope someone reads it, even if it's just one person. Our house is old. I mean really old, built in the 1800s. It sits on a few acres of land tucked away from the main road, surrounded by trees and thick brush. It has those creaky floorboards, old iron radiators that clank when they heat up, and the sort of drafty windows that always feel like they're open even when they're locked tight. We'd been renovating it slowly for the past 3.5 years. Everything from the wiring to the plumbing had to be replaced. It's a beautiful house, but there's something about it that never quite felt right. We were told once that one of the previous owners had died in the house, but I never asked for more details. The first time something weird happened, I was going downstairs in the middle of the night to get a glass of water. It was around 2 a.m., dead quiet. The hallway was dark, and I was walking by the light of my phone screen. As I stepped off the last stair into the living room, I looked up and I saw it. There was a white figure floating, about an inch or so off the ceiling. Not touching it, just hovering below it, as if it didn't care about gravity at all. I froze. I remember holding my breath without even thinking about it. It wasn't a person, exactly. It had no face or shape that made sense. Just this white mass, like steam from a kettle but perfectly still, almost glowing. I stood there for maybe a full second before my legs finally kicked in, and I turned around and ran back upstairs. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't go back down that night. I locked my door, climbed under my blanket, and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. I told myself the next day that it was just sleep deprivation or a weird shadow. That's the only way I could function in that house. I had to make myself believe it wasn't real. A year later, my parents bought a camper. It was one of those used models, not too old, but with that worn-in feel. It came with a built-in radio mounted on the interior wall near the small dining table. Nothing fancy, just AM/FM and a couple of preset buttons. We kept the camper parked beside the barn when we weren't using it. About 2 months after we got it, the radio randomly turned on in the middle of the night. My dad was the one who noticed. He went outside, opened the camper, turned it off, and went back inside. A few days later, it happened again. Same thing, the radio just started playing static or some random channel. Then it kept happening. My dad would turn it off, and within a few days it would turn back on. We tried pulling the battery once. That stopped it, but only until we put in a new one a couple of weeks later. Then it started again. Eventually, we just left the battery out and stopped using the radio altogether. I remember brushing it off as just bad wiring or some weird short in the system. But deep down, I started to feel that itch again, that same pressure in my chest I felt the night I saw the thing on the ceiling. By that point, my bedroom renovation was finally done and I moved in. It had taken forever, replastering the walls, sanding the old floors, installing new outlets. It was at the far end of the second floor, down a narrow hallway that always felt a little colder than the rest of the house. My bed was pushed against the wall facing the door, and my desk sat beneath the window overlooking the backyard. One night, I was lying in bed watching YouTube. It was maybe just after midnight. I had my earbuds in, but I could still hear faint noises outside them. I paused the video because I thought I heard something. I waited. Then I heard it again. This slow, long shushing noise. Like someone trying to calm a crying baby. S-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H. Not loud. Almost whisper soft, but still sharp enough to cut through the silence. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I sat still for a while, staring at the door. No footsteps. No other noise. Just that one sound. I brushed it off as the wind or the trees moving. Maybe even something on the video I was watching. But it happened again a few nights later, and then again after that. Always the same sound, always at night, and always when I was alone. The last thing that happened was in July. It was hot that week, humid and thick, and I remember lying in bed on FaceTime with a friend, just talking about random stuff. I was bored and fidgeting, so I started messing around with the coins I kept in this little ceramic dish on my desk. Just quarters, dimes, and a few pennies. I stood a quarter up on its edge, watching it balance for a second before it fell. Then I tried with a penny, but it kept falling over. After a few tries, I gave up and swiped them off the desk onto the floor. They clattered and rolled beneath the chair, and I left them there. I didn't really care. About 5 minutes later, I told my friend I needed water and went downstairs to the kitchen. I didn't rush, filled up my bottle, scrolled my phone a bit, turned off a couple of lights, then headed back upstairs. When I walked back into my room, I froze. The same quarter I had balanced earlier was now standing upright again, on the edge of the desk, perfectly balanced, right in the center. I knew I had knocked it to the floor. I was 100% sure. There was no way it could have rolled back up there on its own, much less stand itself upright. My stomach dropped. I turned around, went back down the stairs, and asked everyone in the house if they had gone into my room. My parents were watching a movie in the living room, and my sister was asleep on the couch. They all said no, and none of them had moved. I went back up, trying to keep my breath steady, and that's when I heard it again. S-H-H-H-H-H-H-H. Except this time it was closer. It didn't sound like it came from outside the room or through the wall. It sounded like it was in the room, like someone was standing right behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I kept all the lights on and sat on my bed with my back against the headboard, staring at the coin on the desk like it might move again. Over the next few weeks, things went quiet again. No sounds, no moving objects, nothing. I tried to convince myself I imagined it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Like whatever had been in the background this whole time had finally gotten closer. I started keeping the door to my room open at night, just so I could hear the hallway. I left the bathroom light on too, even though it barely helped. Then a couple of weeks ago, my best friend, different from the one I was FaceTiming with, told me something. He said he'd been home alone that week, and that twice, while doing homework in his room, he heard a soft shushing sound. Same kind, same pitch, same rhythm. He lives on the other side of town. We weren't even talking about this stuff when he brought it up. He just said it casually, like he thought it was the wind. But I knew what he meant. I knew that sound. I haven't told anyone else about the coin or the white thing on the ceiling, or how sometimes I still hear shushing when I try to sleep. I don't think it's a ghost. I don't believe in that. I think it's something worse, something quiet and patient and real, something we don't understand yet. Something that doesn't need to break windows or slam doors or throw things around to let you know it's there. It just waits, just watches. And when it wants to, it reminds you. S-H-H-H-H-H-H-H. My father had this way of talking that made everything feel like a lesson. Not the scolding kind, but the kind that crept into your mind and stayed there, like a stone beneath the surface of a lake. Unseen most of the time, but always there. He used to tell these stories, usually around the fire when we'd go camping. Never spooky in the traditional way. No ghosts, no monsters. But they had weight, and they left a mark. One story stuck with me more than the rest. It was about a city built on the edge of a cliff. A beautiful city, old and grand, the kind with winding streets and stone buildings, all stacked like playing cards too close to the edge. The sea battered the rocks below, slowly grinding them down year after year, and everyone knew that. They knew the cliff wasn't going to last forever, that it was wearing away, but they just kept building. Higher and higher, deeper and deeper. More people came. More wells were drilled. More buildings, more weight. Feather by feather, he said, they all added to it until the earth finally gave out, and the whole place collapsed into the sea. He told me that story when I was 11, curled up in my sleeping bag while the fire died down and the night pressed in around our tent. I didn't sleep well that night, and for years after, the image of that city falling stayed with me. That story came back to me last October when I went on a solo camping trip in the Rockies. I just turned 30, recently quit a job I hated, and needed time to think. I packed up my gear, mapped out a long loop that cut through remote trails, and drove up into the mountains. I wanted silence. Time away from everything, people, news, distractions. Just the woods and me. The first few days were uneventful. Cold at night, but manageable. I saw a few other hikers here and there, but not many. Most of them were heading out as I was going in. A couple warned me about incoming weather, but I had checked the forecasts. Nothing serious, just a cold front. I had winter gear. I figured I'd be fine. I made camp at the edge of a ridge on the fourth day. It was a stunning spot. Open views of the valley below, the river winding through the trees like a silver ribbon. I pitched my tent near a large boulder to block the wind, hung my food, and settled in. That night, I sat by the fire, sipping hot tea, and watching the stars blink awake one by one. It was quiet, and I felt small in the best possible way. The wind picked up around midnight. I remember waking to the sound of it pushing against the tent walls like waves hitting a sail. Then the temperature dropped, hard and fast. My sleeping bag barely cut it, and I lay awake for hours, shivering and listening to the groaning of the trees outside. Something about that sound, the creaking and swaying, reminded me of my dad's story. That deep, warning groan of something holding more than it should. By morning, the temperature had dropped below freezing. I melted snow for water and broke down camp quickly. My plan was to hike another 10 miles and camp lower in the valley where it would be warmer. The trail took me up a narrow pass. On one side was a steep rock wall. On the other, a drop into the valley below. The wind howled through the pass, nearly pushing me sideways. The trail was narrow, crumbling in places. I had to take it slow. Halfway through the pass, I saw it. A new crack in the trail. Thin, like someone had drawn a line with charcoal. I stopped and crouched beside it. It hadn't been there the year before. I was sure of that. I'd hiked this loop twice before. The crack stretched across the path and disappeared beneath the snow that had collected along the edge. I poked at it with my trekking pole. The snow gave way easily, revealing more of the crack, jagged and wide enough that I couldn't see the bottom. I took a few steps back. The wind pushed again, strong enough that I had to lean into it. For a moment, I just stood there listening. And I swear, I could feel something, not a sound exactly, but a pressure beneath my feet. A vibration, subtle, like the earth was humming. I considered turning back. I should have turned back, but I told myself it was just a crack. Just erosion. Trails shift all the time. Besides, the rest of the trail was solid, and I had miles to go. So I stepped over the crack, quickly and carefully, and kept walking. That night, I set up camp farther down, in a thick grove of trees by the river. No views, but the trees blocked the wind. Still, I couldn't shake that feeling, that low rumble under my boots. I kept thinking about the people in my dad's story, how they all saw the cracks but did nothing, how each of them thought they were just adding a feather. The next morning, everything was silent. Not quiet, silent. No birds, no wind, not even the sound of the river until I walked right up to it. It was like the world had stopped breathing. I packed fast and started hiking. The trail curved back toward the ridge, and as I climbed higher, the silence stayed with me. I reached a bluff that overlooked the pass from 2 days earlier and stopped to take a break. What I saw made me drop my pack. The trail was gone. Not just cracked, gone. A chunk of the cliff had sheared off. Maybe 50 yards of trail had collapsed into the trees below, which were now splintered and half buried in fresh earth and rock. Snow still clung to some of it. A cloud of dust hung low in the valley, like it had only just settled. It must have happened during the night. I stood there for a long time, staring. I wasn't even angry or scared at first, just stunned. That trail was solid a day ago. I'd walked across it, and now it was gone. The only way back was now impassable, and I was still 2 days from my car if I went the long way around. I didn't eat that day. I didn't speak. I just walked. I set up camp far from any cliffs that night, in a tight spot between boulders. I barely slept, just kept waking up to the smallest sounds. Every time a branch snapped or a stone shifted under the frost, I jolted upright. I kept thinking about the people from the story, adding their feathers. I thought about how I'd seen the crack and stepped over it, how I hadn't turned around, because I didn't want to waste a day, because I thought I knew better, because I didn't think my one decision mattered. The next day, I made it to the trailhead by dusk. My car was there, half buried in snowdrift, but it started after a few tries. I didn't stop until I hit the first town 3 hours later. I checked into a cheap motel, took the longest hot shower of my life, and sat on the bed staring at the wall for what felt like hours. I kept seeing that trail collapsing behind me, kept hearing that groan in the wind, that low, sick sound of too much weight, too much pressure. I haven't gone back since. Haven't camped, haven't hiked. Not because I'm scared of the wilderness, but because I'm scared of how easy it is to ignore the cracks. How simple it is to convince yourself that your feather doesn't count. I still think about that city sometimes, the one from my father's story. How it must have looked, standing tall and proud right up until the end. I used to think it was just a metaphor, a lesson, but now I know better. It was a warning. I went camping out by Spivey Point with 3 friends last fall. I'm not really the camping type, but I've been working nonstop for over a year and needed a break from everything, screens, deadlines, people. Jason had scoped out a quiet little campsite near the shore, not far from Antonio Bay. It was remote, nothing but a few overgrown trails and some clearings along the cliffs. No cell signal, no power. Just us, a fire, and the crashing ocean down below. We arrived late in the afternoon, hiking our way in through tall grass and underbrush that hadn't been trimmed in years. The air smelled clean, salt, wood, and earth. The kind of air that you don't really get in the city. By the time we reached the spot, the sun had already started dropping behind the water. We pitched 2 small tents on a flat patch of land surrounded by thin pines and short brush. The cliff edge was about 30 feet away, and you could see straight down to the rocks below. The tide was low then, the jagged rocks slick with seawater and moss. That first night was fine. We got the fire going and just sat around drinking warm beers from the cooler and eating whatever junk we brought. The stars came out. I don't think I'd seen that many in years. No streetlights, no light pollution. Just black sky and that deep, cold wind from the sea. I went to bed feeling okay, like maybe I'd actually enjoy this. But the next day, things started to feel off. It began when I went down the narrow path that led toward the cliffs. I was alone, just wanting to get a better look at the rocks below. I'd barely taken a few steps when I saw something weird. Charred wood, burned logs, a fire pit, but it wasn't ours. Ours was back in the clearing, way off the trail. This one was older, much older, covered in ash and buried halfway under leaves and dirt, but still there. A perfect circle of blackened stone, like someone had made a proper campfire a long, long time ago. I didn't think much of it at first. People camp all the time, right? Maybe someone had been out here years ago. But the thing was, it was right on the edge of the cliff, where the ground slopes dangerously toward the sea. It made no sense to build a fire there, windy, unsteady, and exposed. Still, I didn't say anything to the others. We spent the second day doing what people do when they're trying to escape boredom without their phones, hiking, skipping rocks, aimlessly talking about old stories. At one point, Jason mentioned a shipwreck out by Spivey Point. He'd read about it years ago. A ship that crashed during a thick fog, lured toward a fire burning on the cliffs. The whole crew drowned. The story sounded familiar, but I didn't say anything. I'd heard that one too back when I was a kid. Fisherman's tale. Something about cursed fog and revenge from the sea. All that nonsense. That night the fog came in. I'd never seen fog like that. It didn't roll in slowly or drift through the trees. It came fast, thick, and low, hugging the ground like smoke from a fire. One moment the stars were clear, and the next, we couldn't see each other from 10 feet away. It was the kind of fog that makes your skin damp in minutes, that soaks into your clothes and makes every sound feel distant and hollow. The fire crackled, and we huddled close. No one wanted to say it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. It felt wrong. It wasn't just fog, it was too dense, too cold. It felt like it didn't belong. The wind stopped, the trees went silent, and all we could hear was the slow churn of waves crashing below. I tried to shake it off. Just weather. Just some weird coastal conditions. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about that old fire pit. It had been exactly where Jason said that ship had gone down. Right there, on the edge. Around midnight, we called it a night. The fog was still thick, and the fire was down to embers. I was in the tent I shared with Dave, tossing and turning. Couldn't sleep. My sleeping bag was damp, the air was heavy, and I just kept feeling this strange tightness in my chest. Like something was wrong. Like something was coming. Then I heard it. A clink. Metal against rock. Faint, but distinct. I sat up, not sure if Dave was awake, not even sure if he heard it. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The fog hadn't lifted. It was even worse now. I couldn't see the fire pit, and I couldn't hear anything but the ocean. But then another sound, like dragging, like something being pulled across the ground. I crouched low, trying not to make a sound. My heart was pounding, ears straining for anything. And then light. Not a flashlight, not fire, just a faint glow, flickering through the mist, out near the cliff's edge, right where that old fire pit was. It didn't make sense. No one else was out here. The nearest trailhead was miles away. We hadn't seen a single person since we got here. But that light, it was there. Steady. Flickering. I moved slowly, crouching behind a tree. I wanted to believe it was just a trick of the fog. Maybe some moonlight bouncing weird. Maybe some old campfire coal still burning. But it wasn't that. It was orange. Firelight. I stayed hidden, frozen in place. I didn't know what I expected to see. Someone out there? Some hiker lost in the night? But no one ever appeared. Just the light. After about 15 minutes, it faded. Not like it was snuffed out, but like it pulled back, swallowed up into the mist. And that's when I noticed the other thing. There were footprints, dozens of them, in the dirt, in the mud, all around the camp. Bare feet, deep impressions, some small, some large. Not boot prints, not shoes, just feet. I backed away slowly, my throat dry, my brain trying to rationalize it. Maybe we made them earlier, walking around barefoot. But I hadn't. None of us had. It was cold, damp. We all wore socks and boots the whole time. I woke everyone up. I didn't care if they thought I was losing it. I told them we had to leave. Something was wrong, really wrong. At first, they were groggy and annoyed. But then they saw the prints. Jason turned pale. Dave kept asking if someone had come by, but we all knew they hadn't. There was no sound of anyone approaching. Nothing. Just the fog and the firelight. We didn't waste time packing. We grabbed the essentials, phones, flashlights, wallets, and started moving. Hiking back through the woods in thick fog with no clear trail is terrifying. We could barely see 5 feet in front of us. Every snapped twig made us flinch. Every gust of cold air felt like it carried something with it. Eventually, we made it back to the car. The fog stopped exactly at the edge of the lot, like a wall. Behind us, nothing but white. Ahead, clear as day. That sudden break in the fog, it wasn't gradual. One step, we were blind. The next, we could see the stars again. We didn't speak the whole ride back. No one slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that light, that flickering flame sitting out on the edge of the cliff, luring something in, calling something back. We got back to the city by morning. I didn't go back to work right away. I couldn't. I stayed in bed for days, thinking, Googling that shipwreck, the Elizabeth Dane. It was real. It sank in 1880, right off Spivey Point. No survivors. The Coast Guard at the time blamed poor visibility and rocks near the shore. A local journal mentioned an unexplained fire on the cliffs the night it went down. No one ever found who made it. I tried going back a month later, just to see, just to prove to myself it was nothing. But when I got to the road leading to that trailhead, it was blocked off. The whole area had been closed due to unstable terrain. Landslides, they said. I never found that clearing again. Not on foot, not on maps. Nothing. But sometimes, when I'm near the ocean on cold nights, I see fog roll in fast and low, and I feel that same tightness in my chest. And I wonder how many more fires will be lit on that cliff. I've never been camping in my life. Not properly, at least. I've gone on day trips to a few hiking spots or picnics with family, but I've never actually pitched a tent, built a fire, and stayed out in the woods overnight. Part of me always wanted to try it, just to see what it was like. But there's one place that pretty much made sure I'd never do it. There's a lake not far from where I live. It's not huge, but big enough to draw in people during the summer. Families, hikers, kayakers, the occasional group of teens wanting to drink in peace. I've been there a couple of times, mostly in the daytime. It's quiet, surrounded by pine trees that go on forever, and the road leading up to it gets narrower the closer you get. Sometimes it's hard to tell if you're even going the right way. The signal cuts out completely once you're close to the lake, and there's this constant smell of damp soil and moss that clings to everything. There's this story everyone around here knows. It's not something people post online or make into some viral thread. It's more local, something you hear from someone's cousin or neighbor. A few years back, a family was camping near that lake. Mom, dad, and a little boy. They set up their tent near the cabins at the edge of the water, those old wooden ones that were once rentals but haven't been used in years. The story goes that they were mauled in the middle of the night, torn apart by a bear. The rangers found them the next morning after someone reported a ripped-up tent and blood near the trail. It wasn't just scratches or a bite. They were basically destroyed. People said you couldn't even recognize them. After that, the cabins were closed off. Some signs went up about unfit for occupancy, but they never tore them down. Just left them there, rotting. That alone would have been enough to keep me away, but there's more. Other stories. Things about weird people showing up at night. Chanting. People in robes. Someone once found a circle of dead birds laid out perfectly by the tree line. Another time, hikers said they saw symbols burned into the bark of trees. Nothing ever got investigated seriously. It's the kind of stuff you assume is just local gossip, kids trying to mess with people. But then my older brother told us something that changed how I looked at that place. He went once with his classmates for some late-night hike or bonfire thing. They parked far out and had to walk a few miles in. It was already dark. They were halfway down a road near the lake when they started hearing something. Voices, but not like talking. It was chanting, repetitive, rhythmic. Then, across the road, they saw them. Figures. Maybe 7 or 8 people. All wearing dark robes, their heads covered. Just standing there in a group, chanting in low voices. My brother and his group froze. They killed their flashlights and crouched down by the side of the road. He told us they didn't even move for 10 minutes. Just stayed quiet, hoping those people wouldn't look in their direction. Eventually, the group walked away, still chanting, disappearing into the trees. My brother didn't talk about it for a while. He said the vibe was all wrong, like they weren't supposed to see that. So that's the kind of place this lake is. Creepy enough in the daytime. I never even considered going there at night, until my friend got it in his head that we should. It started with a simple plan. He had just bought some gear, tent, lantern, a small stove, and wanted to try it all out. He knew I'd never camped before and thought it'd be fun to drag me along. I said no at first, told him that place gave me a weird feeling, but he kept pushing. Eventually, I gave in. We weren't planning to stay deep in the woods or near the cabins or anything. Just a quick overnighter at one of the legal spots a little further out from the lake. We left in the early afternoon. I remember watching the trees start to close in the further we drove. The sun started to drop behind the hills, and the temperature dipped faster than I expected. We parked in this gravel lot that was barely more than a dirt patch with some wooden posts marking the boundary. From there, we hiked maybe a mile to this small clearing with a view of the lake through the trees. We could still see the water, but we weren't close enough to smell it. Setting up the tent took longer than it should have. Neither of us had done it before. The ground was hard in some spots, and we had to clear out a bunch of dead branches. I didn't like how quiet it got while we were working. There were no birds, no wind, just the sound of us walking through leaves and the occasional creak of the trees above us. We finally got the tent up, cooked some instant noodles, and sat down on a log as it got darker. No fire, there were rules about that, but we had a couple of battery lanterns. Around 9 p.m., I started feeling it. That unease, like something was just a little bit off. I couldn't explain it. We weren't near the cabins. We hadn't seen anything weird, but my skin felt tight. Every time I looked at the woods, it felt like the trees were watching, not even moving, just there, still and heavy. We climbed into the tent around 10. My friend passed out fast. I couldn't sleep. The ground was uncomfortable, and I kept hearing small noises outside. Not big ones, just little snaps and crunches. I told myself it was probably raccoons or something. Nothing to worry about. But the longer I lay there, the more I noticed something strange. The noises weren't random. They came in patterns. 3 steps, then pause. Then another 2. Then nothing. Then again. And then it stopped. Maybe 5 minutes passed with total silence. Not even wind. I thought maybe whatever it was had gone. I was finally starting to drift off when I heard something else. Distant at first, then clearer. Chanting. Very faint, but there. Not loud, not close, but real. I held my breath. I felt cold all over. It wasn't just humming or wind through the trees. These were words. I couldn't understand them, but the rhythm was unmistakable. I sat up in the tent and gently shook my friend, but he just groaned and turned over. I unzipped the flap just a little and looked out. Nothing. Just trees and darkness. But the sound was coming from the direction of the lake. I turned off our lantern and crouched low, barely breathing. The chanting went on for maybe 2 more minutes. Then it stopped. Dead silence. Another sound followed. Footsteps. This time from the opposite direction. I stayed frozen. The steps came closer. Crunch. Crunch. They weren't heavy like a bear. They were soft, careful, human. They stopped maybe 30 feet from the tent. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My heart felt like it was going to punch through my ribs. Whoever it was just stood there, waiting. I didn't hear any more steps, just breathing. It was low and slow, like someone trying to stay calm. Then, after what felt like forever, I heard the sound of feet turning in the dirt, the crunch of leaves fading as they walked away. I didn't sleep at all after that. As soon as the sky started to lighten, I woke my friend, packed up everything in a rush, and told him I wasn't feeling well. We hiked out in silence. I didn't even want to explain what I heard. Not yet. The road felt longer on the way back. Every tree looked suspicious. Every branch snap made me flinch. By the time we got back to the car, my shirt was soaked with sweat. We never talked about going camping again. He thought I just didn't enjoy it. He still doesn't know what I heard that night. I haven't gone back to that lake since. I don't plan to. Whatever's out there, whether it's people messing around, something darker, or just my nerves, I don't care. I believe something happened to that family. And I believe something's still out there. No ghosts. No monsters. Just real people doing things in the woods that we weren't meant to see. My best friend and I have been talking about this road trip for years. We always said we'd go north, get out of Central California, drive past the border, and just camp wherever we landed each night. No plans. No reservations. Just our tent, some gas station snacks, and a good playlist. So when we both finally got a week off at the same time, we packed up the car and headed out. It was late spring, warm enough, but not hot yet. Still cool enough at night that a fire felt necessary, not just nice. The first few days were exactly what I hoped for. Long drives through winding roads, small towns with weird diners, trailheads that seemed forgotten. We camped in a couple official sites along the way, nothing too remote at first. But once we crossed into Oregon, things started to shift. The crowds thickened. Every site we pulled into had cars lined up, full signs, people waiting. I hadn't expected that many folks to be doing the same thing we were. I figured we were the spontaneous ones. By the time we hit Washington, we were desperate to find something, anything. It was getting late, and we didn't want to risk driving in the dark with no real destination. We ended up on this stretch of road that felt completely forgotten by time. The asphalt was more like broken gravel, potholes deep enough to swallow a tire. Our car, which had handled everything so far, started making weird groaning noises as we rolled through them. Both sides of the road were lined with these massive, leafless trees. Not skinny dead trees. I mean thick, tall, pale-trunked giants that looked like skeletons. It was the kind of forest where everything feels frozen. No birds. No rustling. No sunlight making it through the branches. Just gray and brown. Monochrome. The dust kicked up behind our tires hovered in the air, floating instead of settling. It looked like fog that had forgotten how to move. And the strangest part? Every 100 feet or so, it looked like someone was standing between the trees. Always in the same spot, the edge where light from the road faded. I knew it wasn't people, but your brain fills in blanks, and every shape felt like a face or a figure staring out. I kept blinking hard to shake the feeling. My bestie didn't say anything, but I knew she was feeling it too. She kept fiddling with the volume knob, like louder music would make it less eerie. Eventually, after what felt like hours, we pulled into this rough dirt clearing. No signs. No campground name. Just a flattened patch of dry grass and a small fire ring. I got out first, stretched, and immediately gagged. The smell was horrible. Not like rot exactly, more like old, wet carpet that had been left to mold in the sun. It was in the ground itself, like the earth was rotting. But we were tired, the sun was almost down, and neither of us wanted to drive anymore. We set up the tent fast, skipping dinner. The whole time I kept scanning the tree line. The smell didn't go away. If anything, it got worse once the tent was up and we tried to lay down. I put a bandana over my nose and tried to focus on anything else. I told myself it was probably just stagnant water or a nearby animal carcass. My friend was already half asleep next to me. I watched the inside of the tent turn from pale orange to full darkness. It didn't feel like nighttime had arrived. It felt like we were sealed in. Sleep didn't come easy. Every few minutes, I thought I heard something, a twig snapping, dry grass crunching, something soft brushing against the fabric of the tent. I told myself it was normal, nature, maybe a deer or a raccoon. I turned on my side and pulled the sleeping bag up to my chin. Then came the sounds, soft at first, a faint brushing sound right at the edge of the tent, almost like fingertips running across nylon. My heart dropped. I stayed still, breathing through my mouth, trying to hear better. Then it came again, this time followed by a sharp tap. I froze completely. My first thought was bear. My second thought, something worse. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters, but something about that place made me doubt my own beliefs. And then I remembered. I had shaved my legs near the tent earlier that afternoon using soap and bottled water. My dumb brain thought, great. Now I've invited something in with the scent. I wanted to kick myself. I lay there, eyes wide open in the dark, listening as the sounds circled the tent. My stomach was tight with dread. I kept thinking if I just moved an inch, I'd draw attention to myself. If something was out there, I didn't want it knowing I was awake. I worked up the nerve to nudge my friend. I pressed my elbow into her arm gently. Right as I did that, the sound stopped. The brushing, the taps, gone. I held my breath. Nothing. No wind. No bugs. Just dead silence. Then I heard it again, except now I realized the sound was breathing. Soft, rhythmic, right next to me. Coming from her. It was her. All of it. Her arm had been moving slightly in her sleep, brushing the tent wall. The tapping? Probably her shifting against her water bottle or backpack. The breathing was just her, deep in sleep. I let out a slow exhale and let my head fall back onto the sleeping bag. I didn't fall asleep for a while, but at least I wasn't terrified anymore. Just embarrassed. My own fear had twisted everything into something dark and awful. In the morning, the place smelled just as bad, and we didn't waste any time packing up. Neither of us talked much. We just folded the tent, jammed in the car, and took off. The road out looked even worse in daylight. Deep ruts, broken tree limbs, more of that strange dust swirling at ankle height. A few days later, when we were at a real campsite closer to the border, I overheard someone talking about that area we passed through. Apparently, it was deep in Bigfoot country. People claimed sightings all the time. I didn't say anything, but the idea made me uneasy. Not because I believe in Bigfoot, because people go looking for things out there. They wander those woods hoping to find something strange. And who knows what else they bring with them. After that, we stuck to more maintained campsites. Still remote, but nothing that felt dead. No more trees like bones. No more places that smelled like decay. And every time I shaved my legs on that trip after that, I did it way far from the tent. Honestly, I don't like letting fear into my head when I'm camping. I love the woods too much. The sounds, the colors, the silence between trees, the way animals move when they don't know you're watching. That's what I go out there for. I don't look for bad vibes, but I also don't ignore them. Sometimes your gut knows something your brain won't admit. I've been lucky so far. Nothing truly bad has ever happened to me out there. But every once in a while, when I'm lying in my tent and the wind dies down and the world gets too quiet, I think about that road, the trees, the way it felt like something was standing between them. And I don't let my mind wander too far, because that's when the fear finds you. I was 13 years old when our school organized a camping trip to a national park in South Africa. It was supposed to be a mix of adventure and learning, 4 nights total, with hiking during the day and sleeping under the stars at night. The first 2 nights we stayed in basic wooden cabins, the kind that have no real insulation, just 4 walls, a roof, and bunk beds crammed into them. The last 2 nights were supposed to be spent in tents we set up ourselves. The cabins felt safe, even if they were a little rough. But the tents, that part still lives in my memory more vividly than anything else. There were about 40 or 50 boys in our grade, so the tents we set up had to be big enough to fit roughly 15 or more kids in each. They weren't proper tents either, not like the small zip-up ones you'd take for a weekend getaway. These were large canvas shelters, open on the sides, just enough of a cover to protect us from rain.
No doors, no walls, no zippers.
We were exposed to the night air, to the sounds, and as it turned out, to everything else that moved after dark. On the 3rd day of the trip, after hiking most of the afternoon, we arrived at our next campsite near a wide, slow-moving river. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees when we got there, the sky fading into deep orange and purple. The river curved around the camp on one side, while the other side was dense bush, tall grass, and thick acacia trees. It was beautiful. In that way the wild always is when you're young and still trying to understand where adventure ends and danger begins. We pitched our canvas tents, rolled out our sleeping bags, and got the fire going in the center of camp. Everything felt normal, even exciting. We were exhausted from the hike, and the air was cool and clean. But once night fell, things started to shift. It began with a single sound, far off like a whooping laugh.
At first, I didn't know what it was.
A few of us stopped what we were doing and just listened. Then we heard it again, clearer this time. That high-pitched, rising cackle that sounds like someone or something laughing where it shouldn't be. That's when it clicked. Hyenas. A few of us looked at each other. Some boys chuckled nervously, brushing it off. The teachers were still up and about, gathering sticks and adding to the fire. They told us not to worry, that the park was well protected, that there were fences, and that the hyenas were likely miles away.
But it didn't feel that way.
Sound travels differently out there. The air carries everything, especially at night. That laugh, it was too clear, too sharp. It sounded like it was close. No one said it out loud, but you could feel the tension rising. The fire was built up again, much bigger this time. Teachers moved around more briskly, keeping their torches close. Some of the boys started whispering, asking if the fences could really hold predators like that. Others just stayed quiet, sitting close to each other around the fire. The night dragged on. I lay down in my sleeping bag, but I couldn't sleep. None of us could. Every time I started to relax, I'd hear it again, that strange, eerie laugh somewhere out in the bush. Then it wasn't just one. There were several, from different directions. We were surrounded by them, or at least it felt that way. The hyenas were talking to each other, moving as a pack. The laughter echoed all around the camp, bouncing between the trees, sometimes closer, sometimes further away. It was impossible to tell exactly how near they were. And with no walls, no doors, just that canvas cover, and our sleeping bags between us and the dark, it felt like we were completely exposed. Some boys pretended to sleep. Others sat up, staring into the bush, gripping their flashlights tightly, but not turning them on. The fire crackled, but it didn't feel like enough. I kept my eyes on the edge of the shadows, waiting to see movement. Every snap of a twig made my heart jump. Every rustle in the grass sent a wave of cold through me. There was a moment around 3 a.m. when everything went quiet. No laughter, no wind, no night birds. Just silence. A heavy, deep silence that sat on your chest like a weight. That scared me more than the hyena sounds. I felt like something was watching us. I remember gripping the edge of my sleeping bag, barely breathing, convinced I'd hear something heavy moving nearby, sniffing, pacing, waiting. But nothing happened. Eventually, the sky began to lighten. Slowly, the darkness faded into a dull gray. The fire had died down, the logs reduced to glowing embers. Some of the boys had fallen asleep from pure exhaustion, while others, like me, had stayed up the whole night, staring at the edges of the bush, listening for sounds. When it was bright enough to see clearly, the fear started to loosen. Nothing had entered the camp. No footprints, no signs of animals. Just some broken branches and trampled grass near the outer edge, which could have been from us setting up the tents. We tried to act normal, joking, stretching, laughing in that way people do when they're pretending nothing happened. The teachers told us we could take a dip in the river to freshen up. The water was freezing, but shallow where we were. Most of us stayed close to the bank. It helped shake off the anxiety from the night before. The sun was rising higher now, the birds were out, and it almost felt like we had imagined the whole thing. A group of boys went downstream with one of the teachers, about 300 feet away from camp, where the river curved sharply and disappeared behind a line of rocks and bushes. They were gone for about 10 minutes when we heard one of them call out, followed by quick footsteps and someone shouting for the other teacher to come. We gathered near the edge of the water, not sure what was going on. Then we saw them walking back slowly, one of the boys looking pale and wide-eyed. The teacher looked angry, but also unsettled. He told us to stay close to camp. No one explained anything right away, but later one of the boys who had gone with the group whispered to the rest of us what they saw. Down there, just past the bend in the river, they had found a carcass.
Fresh.
Whatever it was, probably a small antelope or something similar, had been completely shredded. Blood, fur, bones all over the rocks, torn open in a way that only a pack could do. It hadn't been killed long ago either. Judging by how fresh it looked, it had to have happened not more than a few hours before dawn, which meant the hyenas weren't miles away, behind some fence. They had been right there, just beyond where we camped, maybe even closer during the night. We packed up camp quicker than usual that day. No one really joked around anymore. Everyone kept looking over their shoulders, checking the bushes. Even the teachers were more alert than usual. We hiked quietly to our next stop, a longer route that avoided the river and stuck closer to the rocky paths above the valley. That night we slept in cabins again, and it was the best sleep I'd had in days. Having four walls around me made all the difference, but I still kept waking up, thinking I heard that laugh in the distance. Looking back, I'm glad I have that story to tell. It makes for a good memory now, something you can bring up around a campfire to spook others. But at the time, it didn't feel like a story. It felt real. That tight fear in your chest, the dry mouth, the way your ears pick up every little sound, and how your imagination fills in the rest. That night taught me something important, not just about the wild, but about how close danger can be even when adults try to downplay it. There were no fences keeping those hyenas out, only the fire, and maybe luck.